Regev, Senior Advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister, former Israeli Ambassador to the UK. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Thank you for having me.
So we just heard from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and I just want to quote the phrase directly. He says this is now the second phase of this war. Would you be able to just explain, give us a little bit more context? What does that mean?
Well, I think he said it himself before getting to that remark. He talked about that we had primarily had an air campaign until now, where we were using our Air Force to target Hamas targets inside the Gaza Strip, and now the ground forces have joined in. The air campaign will continue, and there'll now be a campaign involving sea and land forces as well.
We just heard from, a couple of military experts, but just from retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett there, talking about the challenges of both tunnels and rubble after those airstrikes, and a warning from Benjamin Netanyahu himself saying that this is going to be difficult and long. How long is long?
So, of course, I can't answer that question because we don't know exactly, but we have to be prepared, obviously, for a long and drawn-out struggle. Hamas, as the previous guest said, they're dug in deep. They're fighting in the areas where they've controlled for the last 16 years. They've built fortifications. They've built a network of underground tunnels and bunkers. One of the hostages who was released talked about a spider web of underground tunnels. And so we have no illusions. We're facing a fanatic and brutal enemy. But I think if we have no illusions about the challenge, we also, I don't think, have any illusions about the necessity of doing this. This has to be done. We refuse to live in Israel any longer with this terror, ISIS, a terror enclave on our southern border that will be defeated and it will be removed. Our people rightly refuse, to live in constant fear of a Hamas attack. We will not go through what we went through on October 7th again, ever.
We heard Benjamin Netanyahu talk about the fact, in his view, there was no contradiction between bringing the hostages home and dismantling Hamas. We've heard from a variety of military strategists who aren't completely convinced by that. Are you?
Yes, I've been in meetings, and that is our policy, and the issue has, of course, been discussed. But the bottom line is this. Hamas aren't going to release hostages because they've suddenly become good Samaritans. They're not particularly humanitarian people, the Hamas. We saw the violence and the brutality they're capable of when they invaded our country and slaughtered our people. And we see what they're doing in Gaza. They don't care about their own population either. From their point of view, they'll stay in their bunkers and they'll fight to the very last Gazan civilian. That's who we're dealing with.
The Prime Minister met some of the families. The Prime Minister met with the families and the loved ones of the hostages. And we heard from some of them after that meeting saying they'd been loud and clear with the Prime Minister, voicing their concerns about this military operation. But those concerns don't seem like they're going to be listened to.
So, of course, they were listened to. It was a very emotional meeting and a long meeting. And the Prime Minister heard each and every one of them, heard them out and said what needed to be said. And without going into what was said in the meeting, I can tell you what the position of the government is. That precisely because Hamas are not humanitarians, we will only get our people released if they are under very strong pressure. And only if they feel that pressure is constantly escalating against them. And we believe the best way to get the hostages out is to keep that pressure up, keep the pressure on Hamas, keep increasing the pressure on Hamas. That's the way to get the hostages out.
We saw protests, people out in the streets of various cities around the world supporting Palestinians. Do protests like that factor into any decision-making process?
The truth is no. We're fighting for our lives. We're fighting for our country. We're fighting for our people to be able to live here in peace and security. And those people, either they're hostile to us, they don't like Israel, they don't like Jews, they don't think my country has a right to exist in any borders. If those protesters had to experience what Hamas inflicted upon us, what would they be saying? I mean, how can you support what Hamas has done? They say protesters...
Sorry, I have to jump in there because there were plenty of people out protesting who do not support Hamas, who do respect all Israeli life. they're not their concerns at all. They are simply campaigning for improvement in the lives of Palestinians.
So I would argue that if we defeat Hamas, the people of Gaza will get a government, will get a leadership that might be a little more concerned about their well-being, because it's clear Hamas has no concern whatsoever about the people of Gaza. And everyone who wants to see peace and justice in the Middle East, Hamas has opposed historically since its founding in 1987, if I'm not mistaken. Hamas has opposed any peace process. It says any Arab who negotiates with Israel is a traitor to Islam and to the Arab world. And you know what must be done to traitors. They say every Jew is a target for their terrorism. They say my country has no right to exist, not in any borders. These are the most violent and extreme enemies of peace. In defeating them, I hope there'll be room for more moderate and more pragmatic voices to enter the scene.
But there will be more moderate, pragmatic voices in Gaza right now without the aid they need, without power, without communications. Can you tell us if you have any plans to restore, for example, the telecommunications in Gaza anytime soon?
I'd say the following. When we defeat Hamas, and we will, and the destruction that unfortunately will cause across Gaza, I think there'll be a lesson there for everyone, that the path of extremism, the path of Hamas, the path of hatred only brings suffering. And so much more can be gained from cooperation, from collaboration, from working together. Hamas represents death and destruction, horrific violence that we saw on October 7th. Surely there's a better alternative. Surely Israelis and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians can live together in a modus vivendi, in some sort of arrangement where we cease to kill each other. Hamas insists we have to kill each other. We say no.
The international community and Israel's allies, we have seen plenty of senior world leaders stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, defending its right to defend itself. But almost everyone has also added the caveat that it must be done within humanitarian law, that even war has laws. Are you worried that if more civilians are killed in this latest intensification of the military strikes, the support, the international allies that Israel has will start to ask more questions of Israel?
So, first of all, I must say that Israel is acting in accordance with international law. We are trying to minimize collateral damage. We're trying to minimize civilian casualties. Our enemy is not, we're not targeting the civilian population of Gaza. We're targeting Hamas. And it is Hamas that is interested in civilian casualties because it wants to fight to the very last Gazan. When we told people, we urged them to leave the north where there's going to be combat, because we don't want to see them caught up in the crossfire between the IDF and the Hamas terrorists. Hamas says, no, stay. You can't leave. They actually put up roadblocks to physically prevent people from leaving because they want martyrs for their cause, for their crazy cause. They're willing to fight to the very last Gazan civilian. And I think the international community understands that. We've heard leaders in Europe and in America talk about Hamas's policy of using human shields. I think they're being exposed for what they are. That information that we shared yesterday with the international media about there being a Hamas command center right under the Shifa hospital in Gaza City. That shows exactly who we're dealing with. Okay. They embed themselves in humanitarian structures. They embed themselves deliberately in the civilian population. Underneath the ground are Hamas fortifications, Hamas armaments, Hamas tunnels, and above that are civilian buildings.
Okay.
That's how they operate.
But we are out of time. Mark Regev, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Thank you.